the suburbs of Belhaven, Greenwich, on the pleasant evening of October 30th, 1975, summer was in full swing. Martha was determined to convince her mother to allow her to partake in Mischief Night, the pre-Halloween tradition where harmless pranks were played around the neighborhood. After persistent persuasion, Dorothy, Martha's mother, finally relented and granted her permission. However, as the hours passed, Dorothy grew increasingly worried when she couldn't locate her daughter. She reached out to some friends, only to discover that no one had seen Martha. The search for her began, but it didn't take long to find her. Tragically, Martha was discovered lifeless under a pine tree, just 200 feet from her home, brutally murdered with a golf club. The events of that fateful night on October 30th left everyone questioning what had transpired and who could commit such a heinous act against an innocent young girl. The affluent community of Belhaven held many secrets behind its prestigious walls. Greenwich, one of Connecticut's oldest towns, boasted a rich history and culture. Situated just a 50-minute train ride away from New York City, this coastal town offered a delightful blend of New England charm and vibrant city life. The members of the Belhaven community were renowned for their wealth and influence, making it all the more shocking that such a privileged society could harbor dark secrets. Martha Elizabeth Moxley, a social butterfly, was known for her outgoing and fun-loving nature. Born on August 16, 1960, to Dorothy and John David Moxley, Martha was the youngest member of the family, alongside her older brother John. In 1974, Martha's father was transferred from his job in Piedmont, California, prompting the family to uproot and settle in a spacious mansion in Connecticut, thousands of miles away from their previous home in the affluent suburbs of Belhaven. While this transition may have been significant, quickly adapted to her new surroundings. In no time at all, she formed numerous friendships at school as her classmates were drawn to her vibrant personality and self-assurance. In just a span of 9 months, Martha managed to become the most popular girl at Western Junior High School. Her popularity extended to the boys as well, making her quite famous. Martha was a remarkable individual who seemed to have it all. She was known for her friendly nature, athletic abilities, and artistic talents. Everything seemed to come effortlessly to her. Her brother John described her as someone who was easy to get along with, positive, and someone you would enjoy being around. Despite her immense popularity, Martha remained grounded and family-oriented. She would often spend her time at home, either sketching or playing with her beloved cat, Tiger. However, like any other teenager, Martha also had a wild side. During the summer of 1975, she would spend most of her days at the Belhaven Club, engaging in activities like tennis and swimming. She would socialize with children from exclusive clubs who were considered to be of a different class. Unlike her other friends, these children attended private academies and boarding schools and enjoyed a level of wealth that even surpassed Greenwich standards. Among these children, the Skakel family stood out as they were cousins to the infamous Kennedys. Martha had a close connection with the Skakel boys, Thomas and Michael. The Skakels were neighbors to the Moxley family, and Thomas and Michael were nephews of Ethel Skakel and Robert F. Kennedy. The families were related, with Robert being the brother of the late President John F. Kennedy, Ethel Skakel's brother, Rushton, and his wife, and had 7 children, including Thomas and Michael, who were 17 and 15 years old, respectively, at the time of Martha's murder in 1975. However, the Skakel family was far from harmonious. Michael Skakel later attributed chronic illness, alcoholism, and a repressive Catholic upbringing as ongoing sources of turmoil within the household. In 1973, Anne Skakel passed away due to brain cancer, leaving her husband Rushton Skakel, who struggled with alcoholism, spiral further into a state of despair. With insufficient supervision and unlimited funds, Rushton would frequently leave their children home alone. As a result of his mother's death, Michael Skakel expressed that their household descended into an even more chaotic state. Interestingly, the Moxleys lived just about 150 yards away from the Skakels. Due to the lack of parental supervision, the Skakel household became a popular gathering spot for teenagers. Meanwhile, Martha was enjoying her summer days within the secure confines of the gated community in Belhaven. Her teenage years were filled with occasional rebellious acts such as sneaking out, smoking, and indulging in a few beers. In her diary, Martha documented several incidents that occurred during these holidays, many of which revolved around the Skakel brothers. Martha was particularly concerned about the advances she received from Thomas. On September 12, 1975, she wrote, "Dear Diary, me, Jackie, Michael, Thomas, Hope, Maureen, and Andrea were driving in Tom's car. I was practically sitting on Thomas's lap because I was only steering. He kept placing his hands on my knee. Then I took over driving again and Tom put his arm around me. He continued to engage in such behavior." Additionally, on September 19, 1975, Martha made a note about Michael stating, "Michael was so completely out of it that he acted like a real jerk with his words and actions. He kept insisting that I was leading Tom on, even though I only see him as a friend. I told him, well, what about you and Jackie? You keep saying you don't like her, yet you're all over her." He fails to understand that he can be kind to her without being overly affectionate. It was evident that Martha had conflicting emotions about the Skakel brothers and often questioned whether she should continue spending time at their place. The uncertainty regarding her own safety and comfort weighed heavily on her mind. However, no one could have anticipated the events that would unfold next. On the 30th of October in 1975, the mischief hour commenced. Martha made every effort to persuade her mother to allow her to go out with her friends. Martha's father, John, was away on a business trip, leaving her with the opportunity to employ various tactics to gain her mother's approval. After persistent pleading, Dorothy finally succumbed to her daughter's request and granted her permission to go out for the night. Belle Haven, the community they resided in, was known for its high level of security. Every individual entering or leaving the area was thoroughly inspected, making it highly improbable for any crimes to occur within such a safe locality. Martha ventured out with her friends Jackie, Jeffrey, and Helen, heading towards the Skakels' residence where they were scheduled to meet with their Kennedy cousins. As the night progressed, midnight approached. Dorothy was accustomed to her daughter occasionally missing her curfew, so her concern did not arise until 2:00 a.m. Initially, she assumed that Martha might have stayed over at her friend's house. In an attempt to locate her, Dorothy contacted Martha's best friend Sheila, only to discover that she had not seen Martha since 9:30 p.m., around the same time when all the children had returned home. By 3:30 a.m., Dorothy was consumed with worry and decided to reach out to their neighbor, Thomas Skakel, who provided the same response as Sheila. At 3:35 a.m., Dorothy reluctantly gave up and contacted the police for assistance. The local Greenwich officers promptly arrived at the Moxley residence. After conducting a thorough search of the neighborhood alongside Dorothy, they found no signs of anything amiss. The officers reassured Dorothy and advised her to wait until morning. However, before departing, they disseminated Martha's information to nearby stations, urging them to remain vigilant for any sightings of her. Exhausted, Dorothy eventually fell asleep by the window, anxiously awaiting her daughter's return. The following morning, on October 31st, 1975, Dorothy hurriedly entered Martha's room, only to discover that her bed was empty. The authorities were once again summoned, and an unsettling sense of unease began to envelop her. She had a gut feeling that something was amiss. Dorothy refused to simply wait idly, so she made the decision to venture around the neighborhood accompanied by her son, John. The first place they decided to search was the Skakel residence. Despite living next door for 15 months, Dorothy had never set foot inside her neighbor's home. As she approached, their aggressive dog greeted her, leaving her quite shaken. Gathering her courage, she knocked on the door, and Michael, the younger Skakel brother, promptly answered. Dorothy inquired about Martha's whereabouts, but Michael informed her that Martha was not present and appeared to be in poor health. In fact, Dorothy suspected he might be hungover. Undeterred, Dorothy was determined to find some clue. She requested permission to inspect the camper parked outside, as she speculated that Martha might have fallen asleep there. However, her hopes were dashed when she discovered the camper to be empty. By this time, news of Martha's disappearance had spread throughout the community, prompting friends, neighbors, and the police to gather at Belhaven to search the premises. Shortly after noon, Martha's friend Sheila arrived at the Moxley household, trembling with fear, struggling to find the words to describe what she had just witnessed. Through tear-filled eyes, Sheila implored Martha's mother to call 911 for assistance. She revealed that something terrible had occurred, and Martha was unresponsive. Someone had attacked her, and immediate help was needed. Dorothy's companion, Jean, urged her to remain where she was while he investigated the situation. Upon reaching the scene, Jean made a horrifying discovery. Lying face down beneath the towering pine tree at the edge of the Motley property, 200 feet away from her house, was the missing teenager. The back of her head had been brutally bludgeoned and a broken golf club protruded from the back of her neck. Martha's attire was stained with blood, and her jeans and undergarments were pulled down to her ankles. Adjacent to the young girl lay a shattered 6-iron golf club, which had been repeatedly used to strike her head. The force of the blows was so intense that the club broke into 3 separate pieces, scattered across the ground near her lifeless body, except for the grip of the handle. The law enforcement officials were taken aback by the gruesome discovery. In the past 3 decades, Greenwich had not encountered a violent crime of this magnitude, let alone something as atrocious as this. The local police were ill-equipped to handle the severity of the situation at hand. Consequently, a team from the Connecticut County Station was assigned to conduct a thorough investigation. The forensic experts diligently collected as much evidence as possible from the crime scene, while Martha's body was sent for autopsy. The examination revealed no signs of sexual assault, with the primary cause of death being attributed to the blunt force trauma to her head. It was later revealed that Martha Moxley had remained a virgin until her untimely demise. As the investigation progressed, the local police officers in Greenwich began compiling alibis from all known witnesses in order to establish an accurate timeline of events surrounding the homicide. The Skakel brothers were the first individuals on their list. Both boys were interrogated on the same day, during which they provided their respective alibis for the time of the murder. When questioned, Thomas Skakel informed the detectives that he had last seen Martha around 9:30 p.m. outside his residence. He claimed to have immediately gone inside after bidding her farewell, where he joined the family's new live-in tutor, Kenneth Littleton, to watch the movie The French Connection. Thomas later returned to his room to work on a school report about Abraham Lincoln, although his teachers denied assigning such a task. Eventually, Thomas underwent 2 polygraph tests. The first test yielded inconclusive results, but he successfully passed the second one. Michael Skakel informed detectives that he left his residence at approximately 9:15 p.m. and drove to his cousin Jimmy's house, returning around 11 o'clock p.m. The police harbored some doubts regarding Michael's account, but lacked concrete evidence to label him as a suspect in the case. 24-year-old Kenneth Littleton was also under investigation in the autumn of 1976. He informed the authorities that he heard noises outside the house between 9:30 and 10 o'clock p.m. Littleton mentioned that before going outside, he checked on all 7 Skakel children, noting that Michael, his older brother Thomas, and 2 other Skakel boys were not present at home during that time. Detective Salmon's reports indicated that Littleton heard rustling leaves and noises from the bushes on the property, although he did not witness anything at that moment. Littleton stated that he only saw Thomas at 10:25 p.m. when he joined him in front of the TV. The other Skakel boys returned home within half an hour. Littleton claimed to be unaware of Martha Moxley's identity, as it was his first night at the Skakels' residence. Despite failing multiple lie detector tests, Littleton was never formally charged in connection to the case. During the ongoing investigation, the police discovered 2 significant pieces of evidence. Martha Moxley had been beaten and stabbed with a Tony P. golf club engraved with the initials of the Skakel family member. Upon inspection, the same set of golf clubs was found at the Skakel household, with 1 club missing. Rusht and Skakel, their father, who had returned from a hunting trip upon learning of Martha's murder, initially cooperated with the authorities, but later ceased communication with them. On January 22, 1976, the Skakel family, following their attorney's advice, declined to respond to further inquiries and terminated their cooperation with the investigators. Martha's friends provided alibis that raised numerous questions. On the night of October 30th, 1975, Martha Moxley joined her friends for Mischief Night, a neighborhood tradition involving pranks like ringing bells and toilet papering houses. According to her friends, Martha was seen flirting with Thomas, the oldest Skakel brother, and moments later, they found her kissing him. One of her friends mentioned seeing Martha and Thomas near the pool in Skakel's backyard, behind the fence around 9:30 p.m. Over the next few months, the detective conducted more than 200 scheduled interviews. All interviewees underwent multiple polygraph exams as part of the investigation process. Donald Brown, the state's attorney for Fairfield County at the time of Martha's murder, stated that while individuals are not obligated to cooperate with the police, it is unusual for someone possessing information about a violent crime to withhold it from investigators. Initially, the case went cold for nearly 2 decades due to a lack of information. However, in 1991, a rumor linking another Kennedy family member, William Smith Kennedy, to the murder led to the reopening of Martha Mosley's case. Although William's connection to the case was eventually dismissed, this development sparked new leads and reignited the investigation. In the same year, renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Henry Lee was brought in by the police. Dr. Lee utilized advanced technology that was not available in 1975. Dr. Lee examined various items, including clothes found in the Skakel garbage shortly after the murder. He discovered hairs in the fibers, some of which were microscopically similar to the victim's hair, while others were merely similar. Dr. Lee concluded that the hair belonged to a Caucasian male. However, the investigators faced a challenge as they did not possess any hair samples from the potential suspects, making it impossible to establish a match. Nevertheless, Dr. Lee managed to provide a potential motive for Martha's murder by studying the crime scene photographs. He noted that the blood smear on her body indicated an attempt to use force, suggesting a sexually motivated homicide. This revelation led to Michael quickly becoming the primary suspect in the case. Rushton Skakel, in an attempt to clear his family's name, allegedly hired a private investigator. He hoped that this would shift suspicion onto other suspects, particularly former suspect Kenneth Littleton. Unfortunately for him, this plan backfired. Private investigators Jim Murphy, a former FBI agent, and his assistant Willis Billy Krebs, a former NLNPD lieutenant, became involved in the Martha Moxley case. During their interviews with Tom and Michael Skakel regarding their activities on the night of the murder, it was revealed that both boys had lied to the police. Thomas Skakel admitted that he had last seen Martha outside his house closer to 10 o'clock p.m., not 9:30 p.m. Additionally, Thomas and Martha engaged in inappropriate activity outside his home before he went back inside. According to Krebs, Thomas became emotional and started crying while confessing this, but his lawyer interrupted before he could say more. Meanwhile, Michael Skakel informed the investigator that he did not go to bed upon returning home from his cousin's house around 11 o'clock p.m. Instead, he had climbed a tree outside Martha Moxley's bedroom window and engaged in inappropriate activity. Author and journalist Dominic Dunn obtained the investigator's report and passed him on to State Inspector Frank Garr, who had previously worked as a detective on the case. Despite sharing his suspicions about Michael Skakel earlier, lack of information led to dismissal. This report provided new momentum to this theory. Leonard Levitt, an investigative reporter, covered the Moxley case in 1982 and also had a similar theory about Michael. He pointed out the absence of defense wounds, suggesting that the victim knew of her attacker. Levitt believed that the repeated blows with the golf club indicated a crime of passion, implying a personal connection between the two. Levitt waited 20 years to report on Martha Moxley. The report revealed that both Thomas and Michael Skakel had made shocking admissions to the detectives. They confessed to lying to the police about their whereabouts on the night of the murder. Thomas claimed to have spent time with Martha after 9:30, engaging in a sexual act, before leaving her around 10 o'clock. Levitt emphasized the inconsistencies in Thomas's story. In 1998, a one-man grand jury and an investigator were tasked with reviewing Martha Moxley's case. After examining the evidence, Judge George N. Thim concluded that there were sufficient grounds to charge Michael Skakel with her murder. Michael faced trial for Martha's murder in his late 30s, finally receiving justice after nearly 2 decades. He was convicted based on circumstantial evidence presented during the 3-week trial. Investigators have found a piece of the golf club, a 6-iron from a set that had belonged to Michael's mother. However, prosecutors lacked direct physical evidence linking Michael to the murder case. He insisted he was far away from the crime scene at his cousin's house, watching Monty Python's Flying Circus. Nevertheless, jurors later stated they were swayed by his incriminating statements and erratic behavior. Several former classmates of Skanko testified during the trial. While at Elon School, a facility for troubled youths, Michael reportedly confessed to them about Martha's murder. One former schoolmate, Gregory Coleman, testified in a pretrial hearing in June 2000 that Skanko had told him, "I'm going to get away with murder. I am a Kennedy." Coleman also mentioned that Michael had claimed he tried to make advances towards a girl who did not reciprocate, leading him to commit the crime. However, Coleman passed away in August 2001 due to a heroin overdose and did not testify during Michael's murder trial in 2002. Michael had a troubled past, with rumors circulating about his time at Elon School. Despite the school owner's denial of any confession, numerous witnesses supported the claim. 2 former classmates from Elon School, including John D. Higgins, came forward as witnesses during the trial. Higgins described Michael's confession as tearful, dazed, and fragmented, with Michael only recalling bits and pieces of the crime. Gregory Coleman, the other witness, stated that Michael confidently declared he would escape punishment for Martha's murder due to his family name. Following Michael Skanko's imprisonment in August 2002, his cousin, Robert Kennedy Jr., became a staunch advocate for him. Kennedy firmly believed that his cousin was innocent and being falsely implicated for political reasons. In his interview with CBS 48 Hours, Kennedy expressed his certainty, saying, "I know Michael Skanko and I know he didn't commit this crime." In 1997, Michael Skanko collaborated with ghostwriter Richard Hoffman to write his autobiography titled Dead Man Talking. A Kennedy cousin comes clean during the trial. A particular recording played proved to be highly incriminating. Michael admitted that on the night of Martha's murder, he was intoxicated, had consumed marijuana, and experienced inappropriate urges. When Dorothy Moxley arrived at his door the next morning, Skanko panicked. He confessed on the recording, "I was still under the influence from the previous night, a bit intoxicated and worried if he had been seen." Michael claimed he was concerned about being caught by anyone from the Moxley household. Prosecutors argued that Michael's reference to engaging in inappropriate acts was actually him admitting to beating Martha with a golf club. Michael's defense countered by highlighting the lack of physical evidence against him in presenting an alibi for the time of Martha's murder. Nevertheless, the prosecution portrayed Michael as a jealous teenager during the trial. They argued that his rejection by Martha, combined with his drug and alcohol use and access to the murder weapon, led him to act on his violent thoughts. On June 7, 2002, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, resulting in Skanko's sentencing to 20 years to life in prison. The jury and State Superior Court revealed their decision just after 10:30 a.m. following the commencement of its 4th day of deliberations. Russian Skanko seemed almost shocked as the foreman declared the verdict in the crowded, silent courtroom. The public celebrated the justice served. This case was one of the most intricate and sorrowful in the Northeast, enveloped in a whirlwind of affluence and fame. The 27 years of torment finally came to an end for the Moxley family. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Moxley confronted a large crowd of reporters and television crews. Through tears, she mentioned that she had prayed before entering the court. "My prayer began with, 'Dear Lord, once again today, just like I have been doing for 27 years. I prayed that I could attain justice for Martha,' she expressed. This entire ordeal was about Martha," she continued. "Today belongs to Martha. This is truly Martha's day." While Michael was incarcerated, his legal team and supporters fought for the annulment of his conviction. 4 appeals were submitted, all of which were rejected. Then, on October 23, 2013, Michael was granted a new trial due to the inadequate representation provided by his defense attorney, Mickey Sherman. Consequently, Skakel was released on $1.2 million bail on November 21, 2013. Prosecutors strive to reinstate Skakel's conviction. They eventually succeeded in December 2016, when the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled with a 4-3 decision, affirming the validity of his representation. However, the case did not conclude there. In May 2018, the court overturned its ruling with another 4-3 decision, determining that Michael's attorney, Mickey Sherman, failed to present evidence of Michael's alibi during the initial trial. Prosecutors still retain the option to retry Michael, although they will likely encounter challenges due to deceased witnesses and other issues. Michael's legal team, in a release statement, commended the court's decision, stating that it was the right course of action. The lawyers have also stated that Michael, who maintains his innocence, has been wrongly incarcerated. However, the Moxleys remain steadfast in their belief of Michael's guilt. "I have no doubt in my mind that he is responsible," Dorothy asserted. John Moxley, her 59-year-old son, expressed that the jury's decision in the 2002 trial, reached after considering the evidence against Michael Skakel, continues to provide him with reassurance. "We have a sense of comfort knowing what transpired," he stated. Currently 55 years old, Michael Skakel resides with his aunt in Westchester County, New York. He spends his days caring for his 15-year-old son, George, and striving to move forward from the trauma of his past conviction and imprisonment. He is legally obligated to seek permission from the court to travel outside of Connecticut or New York. "I wish to leave this nightmare behind so that I can start building a life with George without this constant burden," he expressed in an email. "I lost 11.5 years of my life. I missed out on George's entire childhood. I know I can never reclaim those years, but I consider myself fortunate to be able to spend time with George now." The death of Martha Moxley haunted the Greenwich community, her family, and friends for over 40 agonizing years. While many still believe that the verdict against Michael was fabricated, ultimately, a mother lost her daughter, and the state of Connecticut failed to deliver proper justice for Martha's death. Numerous individuals believe that Michael evaded punishment due to his connections and wealth. Martha's father, John David Moxley, fought for his daughter's justice until his death in 1988. Even to this day, the Kennedy family continues to be associated with the Martha Moxley case. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who authored the book, framed why Michael Skakel spent over a decade in prison for a murder he didn't commit in 2016, left Dorothy Moxley, Martha's 84-year-old mother, speechless with his publication. She mentioned that truth had never appeared so distorted and manipulated in her entire life. Despite this, she remained convinced that Michael was responsible for her child's death. Kennedy's book dedicated a whole chapter to tarnishing John's character, Martha's father. He cast doubt on his whereabouts on the night of the murder and made several accusations against the Moxley family. As of December 2019, Michael Shacko is still a free man. The memory of Martha Moxley is forever engraved in the hearts of Greenwich residents. A young, beautiful girl was robbed of her innocence before she could fully blossom into adulthood. This is not the first tragedy that has been swept under the rug by the Kennedy family. The legal battle between Michael and the Moxley family was a nationwide conflict, and while there are still many unanswered questions surrounding this case, we offer our sincerest condolences to the family of the victim. On August 17, 1983, it was an ordinary evening in Toronto, Ontario, and a family was preparing the dinner table for Susan Tice, a 45-year-old mother of 4. Susan's absence without communication was unusual. Susan's family became concerned when she did not arrive after several hours and sent her brother-in-law to check on her. When he arrived at Susan's house, he was shocked to his core to find Susan's body in her bedroom, lying in a pool of blood. Months later, Erin Gilmore's body was discovered in her apartment by her boyfriend, Anthony Monk, on a chilly night in December. Anthony was scheduled to pick up his 22-year-old girlfriend for a date on December 20, 1983, at approximately 9 p.m., following her shift at the clothes store where she worked. When Anthony finally made it to Erin's apartment at around 9:30 p.m., he found her lifeless body wrapped in a blanket. What was the true fate of Susan and Erin? Were Erin and Susan acquainted? For the past 39 years, the families of the victims and the police have been asking the same questions. Ontario is a province in southeast Canada, with its capital city being Toronto. In addition to being the most populous city in Canada, it is also the financial, commercial, and trading hub of the nation. Toronto is a fantastic destination for everyone because of its renowned theater, music, and art scenes. However, this lovely location is also the scene of almost 700 cold case murders. Regrettably, we will examine 2 of these horrifying murders from 1983 today. In Toronto, this is where our case begins. The daughter of Dr. Burton Williscroft and the former Jane Wallace of Leith, Susan O'Hara Williscroft Tice, was born on November 13, 1937. In 1961, she tied the knot with Fred Tice. When Susan passed away in 1983, she was 45 years old and a mother of 4 children. Her 4 children, Ben, John, Christian, and Jason, were the source of her warmth and joy, as well as the admiration and affection of her friends and family. She was regarded as the person who brought everyone together and someone they looked up to. The kids' friends used to refer to her as May or Mrs. T. Susan. She was a nurse in Calgary and she divorced her husband, the father of her 4 children, in July 1983. She left Toronto shortly after that, deciding to return to her hometown. Susan began serving the families of people with underprivileged children there as a family therapist. Christian, Susan's daughter, and her were particularly close and had a special bond. However, they had no idea that a catastrophe was going to occur. On August 17, 1983, a calm evening, Susan's family was busy preparing the dinner table for a get-together. Hours went by and Susan never showed up, which alarmed her relatives. They became concerned because Susan was usually reliable and would never skip out on them. They chose to wait for her, but after several hours went by with no sign of Susan, her family began to suspect that something was not quite right. To make sure Susan was all right, her brother-in-law got in his car and headed to her home at 341 Gray Street. The entire scene appeared a little strange as he arrived. It appeared like no one was home because there was a mountain of unopened mail and no lights on. When no one answered the door, he knocked again. Figuring Susan must not have been home, he attempted to peer in through the windows, but it was too dark. He chose to enter through the back door after deciding that something was not quite right. To his surprise, the door was wide open. Her brother-in-law was still searching for her, when all of a sudden her phone rang. When he answered, it was Susan's daughter Christian, phoning from her summer camp. Christian asked her uncle where her mother was, to which he gave no answer. He eventually located Susan in the upstairs bedroom. There she was, unconscious in a puddle of her own blood. Without delay, Susan's brother-in-law contacted the police. When the police got to Susan's house, they started working right away. The police conducted a thorough search inside and outside the home and discovered no evidence of forced entry. Susan had suffered multiple chest stab wounds in addition to sexual assault. There was no sign of the murder weapon. The only person who saw anything was Susan's neighbor, who could provide them with some details. She claimed to have heard a woman scream 4 times at 1:30 in the morning and to have heard someone pass Susan's house. But she did not believe it was a reason to call the police. A DNA sample taken from the semen, left at the crime scene, was the only proof the police could find. The police department was unable to find Susan's killer using this information alone. The police had no suspects or leads. Since there were no suspects in Susan's case, police began questioning Susan's coworkers and relatives to see if they had any information regarding the case. The investigator considered Fred Tees, Susan's ex-husband, as a potential suspect. However, he was quickly exonerated after it was discovered where he was when the crime was committed. The police force appeared to be in a loop, lacking fresh information, suspects, or witnesses, and their investigations consistently appeared to come to a standstill. The police department left the case open in the hopes that someone would contact them with information. The investigators searched for any small hints or information that would point them in the direction of Susan's murderer. They kept waiting, but nothing materialized. The media also reported on the case in the hopes that someone would come forward with information, but they were disappointed. Everyone was shocked by Susan's case, not only her own family, but also the family with whom she worked. The police department and Susan's family were deeply troubled by the idea that someone had escaped punishment for killing someone. After several months, Susan's case appeared to be at a standstill. Her case file was added to the long list of unresolved cold cases that would eventually be forgotten. Regretfully, Susan's family was left in the dark and uninformed. Susan Tice was laid to rest in Grey County, Ontario, Canada's Leith United Church Cemetery, the daughter of David and Anna Gilmore. Erin Harrison Gilmore was born on February 3, 1961. In 1983, 22-year-old Erin was a blonde with a captivating demeanor and a promising future. According to her brothers, Shun and Kellen McCowan, she was a natural beauty who was always full of life and an incredible friend to everyone around her. Despite being driven by her career, she never compromised on her commitment to her family. Erin was a bright, content young woman. She was employed at Robbins Knits, a clothes store, in 1983 and had aspirations of becoming a fashion designer. The store was at 37 Bits Hazelton Avenue, directly below her apartment. She worked there to expand her skills as a model and designer and to obtain experience in the field. She was dating Anthony Monk at the time. Anthony was the son of Peter Monk, the business partner of her father David Gilmore. Erin Gilmore was the sole child of business magnate David Gilmore, who amassed his wealth by founding one of the biggest coal mining firms globally. Erin spent a lot of time with her father and they had a very close relationship. They were unaware that disaster was lurking around the corner. Erin Gilmore was discovered dead on December 20th, 1983. 5 days before Christmas and just 4 months after Susan's murder, Erin had invited her 2 half-brothers, Shun and Callan McCowan, over for a sleepover at her Hazelton Avenue apartment on the evening of December 19th, 1983. For the 3 of them, this acted as a ritual and the brothers used to take pleasure in spending time with Erin. With Christmas quickly approaching, everyone was looking forward to the joyous occasion. Before turning in for the night, they snacked on popcorn and watched movies. The following morning, Erin dropped Callan off at home and dropped Shum off at the market because he needed to shop for Christmas. He had no idea that this would be his last glimpse of his sister in good health. Erin went back home, started working at Robbins Knits, and went about her day as usual. She was expected to close the store at the end of her shift, which meant she would be the last person there at around 9 o'clock. Anthony Monk, Erin's boyfriend, had promised to pick her up from the store at 9 o'clock p.m. for their date, but he was about 20 minutes late because he had to stop by an ATM to get cash. Upon arriving at the store, he expected Erin to be waiting for him, but he did not see her. Anthony guessed that she had gone upstairs to get ready for their date. After climbing the stairs to Erin's apartment, Anthony noticed something strange. The main door was ajar. Though Erin's lack of caution was unusual, he could not help but wonder if she had accidentally left the door open for him. Anthony entered and glanced around, but he was unable to locate Erin. He called her name several times, but Erin never answered. When Anthony opened the bedroom door, he saw that the blanket was rolled up in the center of the bed, even though she was not there. Fearing the worst, Anthony approached it and tugged at the blanket's edges. His worst fears were realized. Erin was covered in a blanket and was not answering. It was not until Anthony noticed the blood leaking from under the blanket onto the bed that he realized what had happened. Fearing for his life, Anthony did not hesitate to dial the police. Upon arriving at Erin's apartment, the police discovered that Erin had been killed and had been wrapped in a blanket. Erin also suffered from both murder and sexual assault. In this instance as well, police discovered semen at the crime scene, which served as DNA evidence. The police did not discover any evidence of a forced entry or break-in when they inspected the crime scene. Erin had suffered several chest stab wounds, in addition to being strangled. The murder weapon was nowhere to be found and there were no witnesses or suspects. The fact that everything that occurred with Erin that night transpired in a mere 20 minutes startled the police department the most. The person who attacked and killed Erin was able to get away with it between Erin closing the stall at 9 p.m. and Anthony arriving at 9:20 p.m. It was going to be difficult for the police to find Erin's killer with the amount of information and evidence they had. Aaron's case differed from Susan's in that it received more media coverage and publicity. The sole child of business magnate David Gilmore, a well-known person in Toronto at the time, was Aaron Gilmore. When the police first questioned Aaron's relatives and co-workers, they discovered nothing strange because Aaron's body was covered in a blanket, a tactic used by killers to help them cope with their guilt. Anthony, Aaron's boyfriend, was considered a suspect in Aaron's case by the police. However, Anthony was ultimately exonerated and removed from the suspect list. It appeared that the investigation was going nowhere. By now, the police were desperate to apprehend this horrifying murderer. The publicity on Aaron's case brought in a lot of new leads and suspects. The investigators questioned over 700 people in connection to Aaron's case, but all were eliminated one by one. Due to the lack of evidence or any proof, the police were unable to find a potential suspect. Going around in circles, Aaron's case also went cold. Although the police found the similarities unsettling, they did not initially link Susan and Aaron's cases together. The police did not find a connection between these two cases until 2000. The police deduced that the same individual killed and assaulted Susan and Aaron by using cutting-edge DNA testing technology. The investigators discovered a perfect match between the DNA samples taken from the two crime scenes after analyzing the samples. The Canadian DNA database contained no additional matches, despite the fact that the two DNA samples matched exactly. This led to a number of new inquiries. The police department was now interested in learning if this unidentified man had committed any other crimes in the 1980s, if he had committed any prior crimes, if he had committed any since 1983, and if he was still at large. The Toronto Police Department announced in November 2008 that they would pay $50,000 to anyone with information that would lead them to Aaron and Susan's killer. Unfortunately, not many people remembered or knew about the crime, and because it had been so long ago. Over the past few decades, there has been a notable decrease in the amount of publicity surrounding these cases. When an informant failed to surface, despite the police department's best efforts, Aaron's family contributed, and in 2012, the reward was raised to $200,000. However, not even that price was claimed. There was a group of detectives who were committed to bringing Aaron and Susan's killer to justice, even though everyone had given up on ever finding their killer. Police even received a tip suggesting that Aaron and Susan may have met their killer at the Yorkville area bars and restaurants, where they both frequented on a regular basis. Police concluded that the murderer either knew the women personally or had figured out where they lived because both were killed in their own houses without any indication of a break-in. However, this was only one of several scenarios in which the crimes could have occurred. Sean and Callan McCowan, Herring Gilmore's brothers, were in close communication with Detective Sergeant Steve Smith. Since the killings of Aaron and Susan were connected in 2000 by the police, the case has slowly advanced, but has remained among the unsolved cases. The investigators posted a call to action on YouTube in March of 2016, inviting anyone with information to come forward. Once more, this had no outcome. Though they were unaware that the police department was already working on this, Sean and Kellen McCowan contacted Detective Smith later in 2020 to inquire about the possibility of using genetic genealogy to find their sister's killer. With assistance from Offram, an American company specializes in using forensic genealogy to solve unsolved murders, disappearances, and the identification of unidentified murder victims. The investigators used forensic genetic genealogy in 2019. Offram then used only the minuscule DNA strands that had been collected at the crime scenes to create a broad DNA profile using forensic-grade genome sequencing. In 2022, Toronto police used the extensive DNA profile that Offram had created to trace the DNA back to two sets of grandparents. At the time, the police were rummaging through the DNA profiles that had already been uploaded on various Canadian DNA databases in the hopes of finding a match that could point them in the direction of the killer, if not a distant relative. Thus, they deduced that the murder of Aaron and Susan had ties to one of these four individuals. The investigators wasted no time in getting to work and thoroughly searching the family tree until they found a family branch that appeared to be very likely the killer's. The investigators discovered a generation of 5 brothers, thanks to this family branch. These 5 brothers were the only candidates left on the Toronto Police Department's list of potential suspects after much effort. They were fairly certain that one of these 5 brothers had murdered Aaron and Susan, but they could not identify the culprit without obtaining a DNA sample from each brother. The police department's efforts to obtain the 5 brothers were going to be difficult because they needed a court order to obtain the samples directly, and the court was not going to grant them a warrant based on the limited evidence they had. The 5 brothers' DNA samples were surreptitiously obtained by the Toronto Police Department using beer cans, glasses, and other items. 4 of the brothers' DNA samples were successfully obtained, but the 5th sample eluded them. Joseph George Sutherland was the 5th brother. After testing every DNA sample they had gathered, the investigators were able to rule out each of the 4 brothers as the murderer one at a time. Even though they were now certain that Joseph was the murderer, they still required a sample of his DNA to support their claims. Using the samples they had taken from the other 4 brothers, the Toronto Police Department then devised a plan. The detectives requested a warrant, reasoning that since the 5th brother was most likely the one who killed Susan and Aaron, all the other brothers had been ruled out as suspects. The judge granted the request and gave the detectives a warrant so they could ask Joseph Sutherland for a DNA sample after considering the research, the investigation, and the detectives' progress in the case. They all raced to Moosonee, Ontario, where Joseph resided at the time, to take a sample of his DNA. The detectives exhaled with relief upon receiving the results. They have finally found their man. The DNA sample recovered from the crime scenes of Susan and Aaron exactly matched Joseph's sample. After suffering for nearly 40 years, the murderer of Susan and Aaron now had a name and a face. In December 1961, Joseph George Sutherland was born in Fort Albany, Ontario. He had moved to Moosonee, Ontario not long ago. Joseph went to Humber College in Tobicoke, Ontario, a Northern Lights secondary school in Moosonee, Ontario. He had been leading a modest life in Moosonee, about 850 kilometers north of Toronto, for the entire time. He used social media to communicate frequently. He was charged with killing Susan Tice and Aaron Gilmore, as well as sexually abusing them. If Joseph was the murderer after all, he was only 21 years old when he killed Aaron and Susan. Joseph Sutherland, then 61 years old, was taken into custody by the police on November 25, 2022, after they showed up at his Moosonee home on November 24, 2022. Joseph was accused of killing Susan Tice and Aaron Gilmore twice in the first degree. He is presently awaiting trial and is being housed as a prisoner at the Toronto South Detention Centre. Joseph's lack of prior criminal history has also been mentioned, which helps to explain why his DNA was not included in the Canadian DNA database. When Shun and Kellen McCowan learned of Joseph's arrest, they were overjoyed. Detective Smith called Shun to let him know about the arrest, and Shun was ecstatic. At last, there was relief along with a great deal of happy tears and profanity. Shun recalled how, overcome with rage, he had punched a hole in the wall the day his mother had told him about his sister's murder. All he wanted was for his mother, who died 2 years ago, to be present to witness this day. Susan's only daughter, Christian, has become a mother herself. She felt relieved to learn that her mother's killer had finally been apprehended. All she wanted was to Susan to be present so she could meet her grandchildren. Whenever she visited her mother's home, she would frequently go up and down the stairs in an attempt to piece together exactly what had happened. Christian still sleeps in the corner of her room with a baseball bat because she is afraid for her safety, but that has finally stopped. When Christian heard the news, she gave her mother's picture a fist bump and exclaimed, "We got him." Susan's closest friend back then was Ann Chisholm, who is now 85 years old. They first became friends as teenagers at Camp Wapameo in Algonquin Provincial Park. The weekend before Susan was killed, Ann had gone to see her, and she was going to see her again the following weekend. In an expression of her sorrow, Ann said that it was depressing and sad that while she had a great life over the years, her best friend Susan had not been given the same chance. The news of Joseph's arrest also relieved Ann. Detective Smith said that Joseph appeared to have anticipated being arrested when questioned about it. Detective Smith added that this was the most complicated case the Toronto police had handled in his 25 years of service, having spent the last 39 years living in Ontario. The Toronto Police Department has announced that they are investigating all other unsolved murder cases in the province to determine whether Joseph is linked to any of them. Susan Tice and Aaron Gilmore were two lovely, hard-working people whose lives were taken far too soon. However, they can both now rest easy knowing that their killer has been apprehended by the police following a protracted and agonizing journey. Genetic genealogy technology progress aided the investigators and was crucial to the case's resolution. The investigators narrowed down a possible suspect family and eventually worked their way down to a single suspect with the aid of a small strand of DNA. Genetic genealogy is a technology that will continue to advance and get better over time. It will undoubtedly be crucial in solving a lot of these kinds of cold cases. Do you believe Joseph might have been involved in more murders in Ontario that are still unsolved? What do you suppose could have motivated Joseph to commit such crimes at such a young age? A 39-year-old woman known only as Jane Doe was getting ready for bed alone in her Charlotte, North Carolina, home on Friday, June 17, 1994. Her kids had not come home yet, and it was already 1:30 in the morning. The woman made the decision to go to bed because she had a long day. In order to allow her children to enter her home without waking her, the woman left her main door unlocked. She calmly tucked herself into bed after bringing out her favorite blanket, not realizing that a predator was waiting for prey outside in the shadows. In a matter of seconds, the woman discovered that an unidentified intruder had her at knife point. What did this intruder want, and who was he? Was the 39-year-old mother going to live to tell about this potentially fatal experience? Charlotte is the most populated city in the American state of North Carolina. Charlotte is renowned for having a big city feel and for having a warm population. Nevertheless, it is among the most dangerous cities for violent crimes, which stands in stark contrast to Charlotte's vibrant and friendly side. Over 91% of the communities in the North Carolina region are safer and have lower crime rates than Charlotte. And one of the most horrifying crimes in history happened here back in 1994. On June 17, 1994, a Friday, the 39-year-old woman was by herself at her Charlotte home on North Clubman Street. After finishing her housework, she waited for her kids to get home. She just wanted to get a good night's sleep because she had such a long day and was exhausted. The woman chose to leave her front door unlocked at 1:30 a.m. so that her children could enter when they got back. As she dozed off in bed, the sound of her bedroom door opening startled her out of her reverie. She briefly believed that her kids had returned home. But when she turned to look in the other direction, she saw a man standing by the door with a knife in his hand. She was terrified and unsure of what to do. The man approached her more closely in a matter of moments, put the knife to her throat, and attacked her. The woman was too terrified to act at that precise moment, but she immediately reported the attack to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department after the attacker left the house. The 39-year-old lady was brought in for a forensic evaluation, during which her body was examined, an assault kit was finished, and the assaulter's DNA was extracted. Medical examiners examined the DNA sample, but the analysis was not very helpful because DNA technology was still in its infancy and there was not much data in their databases. Detectives from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department continued to hunt for the attacker after that, but they were unable to find him. They were unable to generate a list of possible suspects based on the evidence they had. The 39-year-old mother's attacker remained elusive to the detectives for weeks, months, and even years. The victim was left feeling distressed and powerless when the case finally ended without any progress being made for a very long period. In 2018, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in North Carolina reopened the 1994 assault case with the hope that the suspect could now be located thanks to advancements in DNA technology. They re-examined the evidence over the course of that year and ran some more tests on the suspect's DNA sample. A DNA profile was created by forensic scientists in 2019 and uploaded to the databases of the Combined DNA Index System, or simply CODIS. This established a link between the 1994 assault of the 39-year-old woman and the 2010 assault case. An unidentified man kidnapped a 25-year-old woman on March 13, 2010. From the 300 block of Hardin Street in Columbia, South Carolina, which is close to the University of South Carolina. Afterwards, the man attacked the woman and left the area. When the woman called the Columbia Police Department to report the incident, she made an effort to provide as much detail as she could about the man who had assaulted her. However, with the information available at the time, the detectives were unable to identify a suspect. The woman was given an assault examination by forensic experts, who also collected a sample of the suspect's DNA. After creating a DNA profile, this sample of DNA was added to the CODIS databases. Nevertheless, the 1994 case was reopened in 2019, which is when the two cases were connected. Testing conducted in 2019 demonstrated that the same man was responsible for both attacks. Investigators still needed to identify a suspect or person of interest, despite the fact that the investigation had progressed considerably. Detectives worked extremely hard in the ensuing years to identify the suspect, and in 2022, with a little assistance, they succeeded. The CMPD collaborated closely with the Nationwide Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, or SAKI, in 2022. SAKI provided financial support to the CMPD and trained detectives in the use of forensic genetic genealogy to identify a subject. An American company called Althram Corporation, which specialized in forensic genetic genealogy, received a sample of the suspect's DNA. A thorough genealogical profile of the unidentified suspect was constructed by Althram scientists using forensic gray genome sequencing. To generate a list of possible leads, the Althram genealogy team searched their databases using a genetic genealogy technique. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department received the list. James Wayne Ingersoll, 50, was quickly marked as a person of interest by detectives after they thoroughly examined every individual on the list, running background checks and looking through criminal records. James was living in Concord, North Carolina, after being fired from his job in Columbia. When the detective knocked on his door and demanded a sample of James' DNA. After being gathered, a sample was submitted to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Crime Laboratory for additional analysis and comparison. The outcomes of these analyses showed that the DNA samples taken from James and the samples from the 1994 and 2010 attacks matched exactly. The suspect for the assaults on the 39-year-old mother in Charlotte and the 25-year-old woman in Columbia has been identified as James Wayne Ingersoll by the CMPD's Crime Lab and Cold Case Unit after years of intensive forensic testing and evidence examination. Based on his criminal history, James was looked into for a peeping incident in 1995 and entered a guilty plea to assault on a female in 1999, but the latter case was dropped. James' arrest warrant was obtained by Special Victims Unit investigators with the Columbia Police Department, and on Thursday, May 4, 2023, the 50-year-old suspect was taken into custody by the Concord, North Carolina, Police Department, CMPD, and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLEV. James' arrest was reported to both of his victims. Were relieved that their attacker would now have to pay for his crimes after eluding the law for almost 30 years. As a member of the detective team working on the 1994 cold case, Sergeant Darrell Price executed James' arrest in concert with other detectives from his department. He claimed that James was not surprised in the slightest by the arrest. Sergeant Darrell believed that James knew he was being sought by the police when CMPD caught him, and that James had been tipped off by some individuals who had seen the department's public assistance request. Surgeon Darrell Price had spent 13 years as an employee of the CMPD Cold Case Unit. Only 6 weeks away from retirement after 42 years in law enforcement, he was pleased to have contributed to the resolution of one of his final cases. Olivia H. Skip Holbrook, the chief of police in Columbia, South Carolina, declared that James Wayne Ingersoll would face charges of first-degree criminal sexual conduct and kidnapping. James would also be charged in Mecklenburg County Superior Court with first-degree assault and burglary. Currently housed in the Mecklenburg County Detention Center, Ingersoll's bond has been set at $600,000 by a North Carolina judge. The detectives are currently working to get an extradition warrant from the governor's office so that James can be charged in Columbia, because he has refused to wait extradition. The investigation is still active and ongoing into both of these cases in order to find more evidence that connects James to these crimes. The Columbia and Charlotte-Mecklenburg police departments had asked anyone with more information about the case to come forward. According to CMPD assault cold case investigator, Surgeon Darrell Price, This was the third instance in which an arrest resulted from a novel form of genealogy testing. He continued by saying that the department is still looking into more than 3,000 assault cold cases. He was optimistic that the development of DNA technology would eventually prove to be very helpful in cracking many of those unsolved cases. Unfortunately, attacks similar to the one that took place in this case were not uncommon. Also sharing her heartbreaking tale was Lily Milhouse, who then moved into the Charlotte, North Carolina neighborhood, where the 39-year-old mother had been attacked nearly 30 years prior. The now 70-year-old Lily claimed that even though she was only a teenager when she was assaulted, the memories of that terrible day still torment her. She experienced the same suffering as James' victims did, despite having no connection to the assaults that he committed. Lily wished for the closure of James' victims, knowing that he had been arrested for his crimes. She also disclosed that although the accused in her case was ultimately apprehended, the damage his acts caused was irreversible. This case takes us to the scenic city of Bend, which sits on the Deschutes River in Oregon, home to 23-year-old Kaylee and Sawyer, who lived with her boyfriend of a couple of years, Cameron. Kaylee worked as a dental assistant, and she was also busy studying at Central Oregon Community College. She was creative, enjoying photography, drawing, and writing poetry. She was also very sporty, loving snowboarding, golfing, fishing, and wakeboarding. With so many other outdoor activities and beautiful sights to see and photograph in Bend, it really was the perfect place for Kaylee to live. Her parents had divorced and remarried when she was young, but she had a great relationship with both of them and her step-parents, and she was also close to her 4 brothers. Friends and family said she was one of the happiest people they knew. She was giving, popular, always smiling and entertaining everyone, and she was often out and about socializing. Her mother said everybody was a friend to Kaylee, even if they were a stranger. On the evening of July 23, 2016, Kaylee had plans to celebrate a friend's bachelorette party. She got ready and left home to go and meet everyone in downtown Bend, very close to her college campus. After she parked her car at her friend's house, they all headed out for the evening. Over the next couple of hours, Kaylee and her friends moved around various bars. Everybody was in good spirits. The drinks were flowing. Everyone was dancing, singing, playing games, and enjoying the celebrations. At one point, Kaylee started dancing with a man at the bar, and one of Cameron's friends who happened to be there too, saw her and texted Cameron to tell him. Just after midnight on what was now July 24th, the night out was coming to an end. Everybody had had a lot to drink, and Kaylee called Cameron asking for a ride home. As he was on the way to get her, Kaylee texted Cameron's friend to apologize about dancing with the other man and how the situation might have looked. A short while later, Cameron arrived and picked Kaylee up. An argument started right away, which carried on the entire ride home. They parked up outside of their apartment complex, and Cameron said he stormed out of the car as the argument got more heated. Kaylee stayed inside, crying and saying she needed some space to calm down. 10 minutes later, Cameron went back outside to try and coax her in. It was too late to be arguing, and if they just went to sleep, everything would be fine the next day. But as he approached the vehicle, he realized the passenger door was wide open and she was no longer inside. In fact, Kaylee Sawyer was nowhere to be seen. Cameron started searching and sent Kaylee several texts. "Where are you? Kaylee, please just come home to be with me. I don't want to play this game. I'll start searching, but please help me out." Kaylee replied, saying, "My phone's about to die." Cameron said, "Please don't do this to me. I apologize for being upset when I picked you up. I just drove up and down College Way really slow. I didn't see you and I don't know where else to go. Just come back." Kaylee said, "Are you kidding? Because that's bullshit. Goodbye." She then turned her phone off and stopped responding. Cameron went to a friend's house, hoping she had walked there, but she hadn't. He drove up and down the streets looking for her, but to no avail. Kaylee's mother, Julie, and her friends were also trying to get hold of her, but Kaylee wasn't responding to any of them either. Everybody was still holding out hope that she had turned up at someone else's house to call off, but it was seeming less and less likely the more time that passed, and soon the police were called. Kaylee's name began circulating on social media and the word was spreading that she was missing, culminating in hundreds of volunteers coming out to look for her. Cameron was interviewed right away, but detectives had no reason to be concerned about him or anything he said, and he was very quickly ruled out. The friends she had been out with were also questioned, but they couldn't help either. Their attention then turned to the man she was seen dancing with at the bar, and they hoped this might give them a lead. But he was just as shocked that she was missing. He had danced with her for all of a few minutes before she had rejoined her group and then left, and he hadn't seen her again after that. Everybody was definitely concerned, but Kaylee's mother Julie was far more than that. She said the second she heard her daughter was missing and not replying to anyone, she felt a shift in her whole body and something was telling her that Kaylee was no longer alive. Officers started trying to find the location of her phone. Her phone was pinging all over the city of Bend, but sadly this was confirmed to be an old iPhone. That was still registered under Kaylee's Apple ID. It was now Monday morning and Kaylee hadn't shown up to her shift at the dental clinic. Police knew they had to pick up the pace and Kaylee entered law enforcement databases as an endangered missing person. As they approached the 24-hour mark, a new police officer called Isabel would report something to her colleagues that would blow the case wide open. She told them that her husband had been acting very strangely in the last couple of days and had said some incredibly concerning things to her. Her husband was 31-year-old Edwin Lara, and Isabel said his odd behavior had been apparent since he came home very late on Sunday after his shift had finished. He often worked long and late hours as a college campus security guard. The couple had been having problems for a long time, so Isabel didn't push him for answers, and just assumed he was being off with her. A few hours later, on what was now Sunday morning, Edwin and Isabel attended church together where Edwin was in the church band, and after this, they went to go and watch a film. But Edwin's weird behavior carried on into the next morning. Edwin also told Isabel that some of Kaylee's things were hidden in the shed, and after this, he fled the house armed with Isabel's gun. Officers went straight to the home where they found exactly what Isabel said they would. Kaylee's person ID, her shoes, a blood-stained rock, and a clump of what looked like it could be Kaylee's hair. What they found pointed to far more than accidentally hitting her with his car and panicking. Everything was pointing towards this being a violent homicide. By this point, however, Edwin was already on the run on what would become an interstate crime spree. After leaving his car at his parents' house, he spotted a 19-year-old called Andrea sitting in her car in a parking lot. She had just clocked off of a 12-hour shift and was about to head home when Edwin opened the passenger side door, pointed a gun at her, and demanded she start driving. As she drove, he showed her pictures of him in his campus security uniform and spoke to her about the news reports talking about Kaylee. After 3 hours on the road, Edmund wanted to stop at a motel for the night. As he checked in, he made Andrea pretend to be his girlfriend. Once inside the room, he handcuffed her to the bathroom door while he showered. He then ordered her to take a shower in front of him. Andrea was fighting against him every step of the way and point-blank refused. After this, he handcuffed her to the bed and told her to take sleeping pills. In this very moment, the alarm on her phone went off, and thinking on her feet, Andrea lied, telling Edwin she had an STD and the alarm was to remind her to take her medication. She hoped that this would stop him from sexually assaulting her. And fortunately, her plan worked. Edwin, who was becoming more paranoid by the minute, then decided to leave the motel at 1:30 in the morning. The pair carried on driving until 5 a.m. before stopping at another motel. He walked over to a 73-year-old man near his vehicle and tried to take it before shooting him in the stomach. He didn't get the car. Unfortunately, the man survived. Edwin then fled with Andrea on foot to a nearby gas station, where he carjacked a 76-year-old woman. The woman and her 2 young grandsons were inside the car. He forced one of the teens to drive the car at gunpoint before letting them go and carrying on with the vehicle. And thankfully, the family were unharmed. Edwin ordered Andrea to start driving to California, where he had family. During the drive, Edwin used Andrea's phone to record a video of himself. He made her post it to Facebook, titling it "Murderer on the Loose." Edwin called his family to tell them what was going on, and at 6:40 a.m. he called 911, telling them who he was and what he was wanted for. A California Highway Patrol officer saw the car speeding on the interstate and tried to pull it over. The chase reached more than 100 miles per hour before Edwin was eventually pulled over. Before he was arrested, he recorded himself saying, I know this is being recorded, and I just want to say to the family of Kaylee that, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did, and in time I will tell them where the body is." He then handed the phone over to Andrea, and the police placed him in handcuffs. 19-year-old Andrea was also arrested, but when they realized that she too was another innocent victim, she was released. When Edwin was taken into custody, he told the officers the same story he had told Isabel, that he had accidentally hit her with his car, but said that he had then strangled her when she wouldn't stop screaming, something which everybody agreed made no sense at all. After this, the detective told him that it was for the best that he come clean, as he would only have to answer to God and repent his sins. Everyone who knew Edwin said he was devout in his religion and that it was one of the most important things to him. So the detective decided to use this knowledge to hopefully get a confession. Edwin finally started to tell the truth. Kaylee had left Cameron's car and walked out into the night, and when Edwin saw her, started following her in his patrol car. The conversation between the pair, if there indeed was any conversation at all, remains unknown. But somehow, Kaylee ended up in the back of the car and Edwin started driving. Police and Kaylee's family believed that Edwin had offered her a lift, and she had accepted under the assumption that she would be safe with a security guard in the patrol car. Students leaving clubs or bars often received rides home from the campus security, so this would likely not have been unusual or alarming. But as soon as Kaylee got in, she was trapped. The doors wouldn't open from the inside, and she would have been completely helpless. It wasn't long before Edwin started demanding that she have sex with him, and when she refused, he strangled her until she was unconscious. She was then driven several miles out, where he strangled her again and smashed a rock against her head. He then raped her. Kaylee was still alive, and Edwin grabbed another rock and hit her in the head, and left her body there. It is unknown whether she was still alive at this point, which is a truly horrendous thing to contemplate. After this, he drove back to the college campus where he changed cars, and drove back later in an attempt to conceal her body. After he told them everything, officers went to locate the first car that Edwin had been driving when he went on the run, and inside were some handwritten notes, one of which read, "The place I killed her is on the B12 lot. Run her over on College Way," and another which said, "This note is to say that I am sorry for taking her life." It was after this that near a canyon off of Highway 126, the body of Kaylee and Sawyer was finally found. Despite his confession, Edwin Lara pleaded not guilty, and the prosecution announced that they would be seeking the death penalty. Edwin's lawyers argued that his rights had been violated in the interview room as he wasn't given the option to make any phone calls whilst being held in custody. Everybody's dismay. During a pretrial hearing, a judge actually threw out his lengthy and detailed confession and said that it could not be used as evidence. The prosecution were then left hoping that the forensic evidence would give them enough, but it was undoubtedly a huge blow to their case. Edwin's attorney called his crime spree an enigma and said it could only be explained by his client's genetic degenerative cognitive brain disability. The prosecution said there was no doubt he was a potential serial killer and psychopath. In January 2018, in order to avoid the death penalty, Edwin changed his plea to guilty of aggravated murder and robbery. Despite the evidence they had in Kaylee's case, the charges of sexual assault did not stick. Although Edwin had pleaded guilty, he did not plead guilty to sexual assault. The county district attorney spoke with Kaylee's family and told them that their main goal as prosecutors was to put Edwin away for life, and pushing for a sexual assault conviction as well might complicate the trial and jeopardize the chances of getting a life sentence for murder. Her family begrudgingly agreed, and with this, Edwin Lara was given a life sentence without parole for the murder of Kaylee and Sawyer. He later received a second life sentence for the kidnap of Andrea. The judge credited Andrea for her extreme courage and bravery and thanked Kaylee's father and stepmother for one of the most difficult letters he'd ever had to read in his career. He told Kaylee's family he was deeply sorry and said, "I wish I could change things. I can't." Edwin's wife Isabel filed for divorce and resigned from her position as a police officer, feeling she couldn't carry on with it given what it was her ex-husband had done. In her resignation letter she said, Kaylee's family filed a lawsuit against the college for failing to do an adequate background check on Edwin and for not acting upon behaviors that gave many people cause for concern. One female officer actually refused to ride in the same car as him and reported him because he scared her so much. The lawsuit also included evidence that the campus safety vehicles very closely resembled police patrol cars, and Central Oregon community officers were given uniforms that were also similar to the Bend police. Community officers were armed with pepper spray, ballistic vests, body cameras, and handcuffs, and drove vehicles with cages inside, and the lawsuit said this simply should not be allowed as it allowed people to abuse their position. Kaylee's family finally reached a $2 million settlement with Central Oregon Community College. In 2022, more tragedy came for the Sawyer family when Julie's storage unit was broken into by two people on a drug-fueled crime spree. Over 12 months, John Vieira and Emily Pickett stole from many people, including Julie and her husband, taking $30,000 worth of their belongings, including some of Kaylee's ashes, which Julie had put into a little necklace. John Vieira pleaded guilty to 16 property crimes and was given a 40-month sentence, while Emily was sentenced to 10 days in prison. John admitted to throwing the necklace containing Kaylee's ashes into a bin, and tragically, it has never been recovered. Kaylee's legacy also stays strong through Kaylee's Law, which was passed in 2019. Kaylee's Law requires campus security and their vehicles to be clearly distinguishable from actual law enforcement. The vehicles cannot have rooftop lights or a divider known as a cage between the front and back seats. They must have a GPS and an interior video camera that records whenever someone gets inside. Campus officers are also now prohibited from making vehicle stops or stopping and frisking individuals. National background checks and psychological testing would also be required before a security officer is hired. Her family also started KK Readers, KK being Kaylee's nickname. KK Readers honors Kaylee by donating Dr. Seuss books, specifically Oh the Places You'll Go, to children in Head Start preschool classes all over Central Oregon. It was her favorite book as a child and inspired her to write stories and poetry as she got older. The murder of Kaylee devastated so many, and the painful aftermath prompted some much-needed changes in the lore. Julie said of her daughter, "The moment I held her, I understood what love at first sight meant and that it is real. She will continue to live on in all the memories that are shared. She had an amazing 23 years, and I want that to be remembered." As the evening winds down in one of the most glamorous and luxurious department stores in London, gunshots suddenly ring out. People run to find cover, worried it's a robbery or a terrorist attack. As police descend on the scene, it soon comes to light that this is the tragic culmination of a disturbing series of events. 22-year-old Claire Bennell was originally from Groombridge in Kent. She had attended St. Gregory's Catholic Comprehensive School in Tunbridge Wells before moving on to West Kent College, where she obtained a BTC National Diploma. Claire was shy, gentle, and very thoughtful, always thinking of other people and never speaking ill of anybody else. She took part in several makeup and beauty courses specializing in consultancy and also did theater makeup at Shepperton Studios. Soon her hard work would pay off as she got a job as a beauty consultant in the department store Harvey Nichols in Knightsbridge, which was Claire's dream job. Harvey Nichols is one of London's most iconic luxury department store chains, with the Knightsbridge one being its flagship store. To prepare for her interview, she had written pages of notes, determined to make the best impression possible. And, sure enough, she was successful. From a young age, Claire had loved all things skincare and makeup, and so she was thrilled to land a role like that. And she was incredibly proud to be working for such an iconic store. She was popular with her colleagues and was described as well-spoken and quiet with a warm personality. She made the move to Dulwich in southeast London and lived with two flatmates whom she also worked with. Claire was thriving in London. The busy city life was exciting and she was making the most of every opportunity. It was while working at Harvey Nichols that she met one of the security guards, 30-year-old Michael Pesci. The pair began chatting and he soon asked her if she wanted to go on a date with him in January 2005. Michael Pesci was a dual citizen of both the Czech Republic and Slovakia. He had previously been a soldier in Slovakia but would be prosecuted for desertion. After working as a security guard at the United States Embassy in Bratislava, he moved to the United Kingdom. Shortly after arriving, he began working as a security guard for Harvey Nichols. They went on a few dates over the course of about 3 weeks. Claire's mother Tricia would later say, "He was quite a bit older than Claire and he was going through a divorce. It wasn't an ideal situation that any mom would want for their young daughter. During the time they dated, I never got the sense she had fallen in love with Michael. She was very flattered by his attention. He showered her with affection and very quickly told her he loved her." Claire's cousin Kristen said alarm bells went off when he told her that he loved her after a very short time. It was no more than 3 dates they had been on. The red flag just started waving. After their first date, Claire called her mother and told her she felt very uncomfortable. She said he wanted to be with her all the time and didn't like her seeing her friends. She said he didn't like her going home and that she was feeling suffocated, adding, "It's all happening much too quickly. Things only started to get worse." When Michael returned from a trip to Slovakia, he demanded that Claire be there to meet him when he got into the airport, as he didn't want to have to take his suitcase across London. He then said he wanted to stay at Claire's flat, a prospect that made her extremely uneasy, as they had only been on a handful of dates. When she asked him to leave her flat, he refused and was adamant that he stayed. After a lengthy back and forth, she was able to persuade him to walk to the train station, but he then refused to board any train. Claire had had enough. She told him it was over, but he would not take no for an answer. Pesh called her 20 times, and when she didn't answer, he sat outside her flat for 2 hours. He became verbally abusive and shouted at her flatmate, and he was adamant that he needed to talk to Claire, but her flatmate refused and he finally gave up and left. The following day, he followed her home with a huge bouquet of flowers. She reiterated what she had said the day before. It was over and she wasn't interested. She left the flowers on her doorstep and they stayed there all week. This was just the beginning of a terrifying campaign of harassment. His incessant phone calls and texts carried on with him, messaging her up to 50 times a day. One text read, "We are meant to be together." She would change her phone number, but he would soon find out what her new one was, and the messages started all over again. His delusion that they were still in some sort of relationship was evident from his messages, with one reading, "It's our anniversary tomorrow. How should we spend it?" He would watch her while she was working and would use the mirrors and reflections in the store in order to look at her. He would apply pressure on people who worked at Harvey Nichols and ask them to get Claire to talk to him. On one occasion, she did decide to speak to him and asked him to stop harassing her. But this, like everything else she had previously said to him, had no impact. He would not take no for an answer. One day, as Claire was leaving work, he followed her in his security uniform. He grabbed her and shouted at her, yelling that he loved her and he knew that she loved him too. Claire tried her best to reason with him and said that she didn't love him. His response was to scream at her, "Yes, you do, you stupid little girl." His text messages would also become increasingly sinister, with one message reading, "If I can't have you, then no one will." This would go on for months, and the people in Claire's life were becoming increasingly aware of what he was doing. A colleague would say it was well known he was stalking her. His stalking was also having a major impact on her professional life. She was getting into trouble at work because she would run late or struggle to concentrate and focus. In March 2005, Claire was heading home. She noticed Pesh waiting at the underground station. In a desperate attempt to get away, she ran and jumped onto the train, but he was able to get onto the same carriage and sat opposite her. As the train came into the next stop, she got off and tried to run away, but he chased her and forcefully pushed her. She was then able to get onto another train, but Pesh was right behind her. She said, "If you don't leave me alone, I will have to report you." He replied, "If you report me, I will kill you." She said that all she wanted was for him to leave her alone, and if he did this, she wouldn't take it to the police. He smiled at her, stroked her face, and attempted to kiss her. Claire pushed him away and he got off at the next train stop. When the train didn't immediately leave, he started banging on the train window and waving at Claire. Shaken and afraid, she called her mother in tears and told her what had happened. This was incredibly difficult for her family to see someone they loved being put through something like this. Claire's cousin would later say, "Just by looking at him, I didn't get a good feeling." He is batshit crazy, and he is dangerous, and he is unstable, and he's obsessed. Refusing to put up with it anymore, she told her bosses at work about what had been happening to her. The head of security for Harvey Nichols was a former police officer, and when he was informed, he took what Claire was saying seriously. He used the security cameras to track what Pesh was doing, and he soon saw him stalking and harassing her. He also spoke to different members of staff and compiled a file of complaints and accounts about what he had been doing. Pesh was moved onto a different floor and put on a different rotor to her. But this still made no difference, and he would come to Claire's department constantly. He was then suspended. The head of security encouraged her to report him to the police, as Pesci had threatened to kill her if she went to the authorities. She initially didn't want to report him. Her mother said she had also been hesitant as she felt embarrassed about what was happening to her. The tipping point came when it emerged that he had asked another member of staff, who was working part-time at the store whilst training to be a lawyer, if someone committed a murder, what would the sentence be? Claire then contacted the police. He was asked to come into work, where he was met by police and arrested. He was also immediately sacked from his job as a security guard. As he was let out, Claire saw him and told her mother that he looked angry. In spite of all that she had suffered, Claire felt bad, with her mother saying she didn't want him to get into trouble. She just wanted him to stop. He was taken to the station and interviewed, and his version of events was totally different to Claire's. He said that he had been the one to end the relationship, and that she had said that she loved him. He said he had then regretted breaking up with her, so went back, but he couldn't understand why she didn't want to be with him anymore. He said that he was sorry if he had upset her, but denied making threats to kill her. He admitted to everything else, saying he had only wanted to see if she wished to continue the relationship. The police took statements from Claire, but didn't take statements from her colleagues or flatmates who had witnessed the stalking. She also wasn't given a formal risk assessment. Other than what she had said, the officers had no evidence of him making threats to kill. Michael Pesh would later be released on bail under a non-molestation order, meaning he was not allowed to contact Claire at all or go to the store. His recent brush with the law had not deterred him, as just 2 days later, he was back on her doorstep, waving at her through the window. She called the police, but he had fled by the time they arrived. No action was taken. Claire and her flatmates decided to move away in the hope they could escape him. But within just a few days, on the 10th of April, he had turned up at their new place, after finding out where they were now living. She called the police again. They arrived, but like last time, Pesh was gone. Claire got into the police car and drove around trying to spot him, and eventually they did. He cooperated, even holding out his wrists for the officers to put handcuffs on him. He didn't seem bothered and was just smiling at Claire. He was put under arrest for breaching the conditions of his bail. He was charged under Section 2 of the Protection from Harassment Act of 1997. Claire's mother Tricia said, the police relayed the message to Claire that he really didn't mean the threats, that he said there was a language barrier and he was upset and would never have hurt her. He was sent to Balmarsh Prison where he spent the next 8 days. He was then bailed to make his appearance in court, which was scheduled for the 31st of August, on the condition he did not go to Knightsbridge or contact her in any way. As he awaited trial, Claire and her mother went on holiday to Florence to celebrate her birthday. They spent 5 days there and Claire was making the most of every moment. Her mother said the trip was pure gold. After all she had been through, was finally able to relax and enjoy herself. During this time, Michael Pesh went back to Slovakia. Whilst there, he went to a firing range and underwent weapons training. On the 14th of June, he passed the firearms exam and a month later, he obtained a firearms license. He also purchased and registered a handgun. On the 20th of July, he headed back to the United Kingdom. He traveled via coach and ferry and was able to smuggle the handgun into the country in his luggage. As the trial loomed, Claire waited to be called to give evidence. But then, on the 31st of August at Tower Bridge Magistrates Court, Michael Pesh suddenly changed his plea to guilty. There would be no trial and Claire would not have to face him. He was then released on bail. Claire was relieved that what had been happening to her and what she had suffered was finally out, saying she now just wanted to get on with her life. September 13th, 2005. Since the trial, Claire had not seen Michael Pesh, and her life seemed to be getting back to normal. As Claire's day started, she headed into work. The hours ticked by as she served customers on the shop floor. And before long, she was just 10 minutes away from her shift ending at 8 p.m. A few customers were walking around, and the store was generally quiet as it was so close to closing time. One of Claire's colleagues put her hand up to Claire and looked at her watch, showing there was only a few minutes to go. Claire smiled back at her. One of Claire's colleagues then noticed a shadow appear behind her and believed it may have been a boyfriend who had come to meet her as she finished. The figure then raised his arm, brandishing a gun. He fired a shot at the back of Claire's head and she fell to the floor. He then fired 3 times at her face. As people ran to find cover, he fired another shot into the ceiling. He then turned the gun on himself and took his own life. Michael Pesh had just carried out his terrifying threat. Claire's mother Tricia had been out celebrating a friend's birthday that night. After returning home around midnight, she heard a loud banging on her front door. After opening it, she was met by 2 police officers. One of them told her they were there about her daughter. The family liaison officer then gave her the devastating news. Her daughter had been shot dead at work. Tricia knew instantly who was responsible and said, "It was Pesh, wasn't it?" The officer nodded, confirming that it was. In a statement, her mother said Claire was unaware of her own beauty, both inside and outside, and only fault Claire possessed was to see good in everybody. This trust was eventually abused, leaving us all with such unbearable grief. Her colleagues were left devastated by her murder, and they were offered counseling to help them process their trauma. As the investigations into what had happened were carried out, Pesci's flatmate found a 40-page notebook. One entry shortly before he murdered Claire detailed how he was contemplating the meaning of life, with references being made to ghosts and prophets. Also in the diary was Claire's address. He had written poetry too, and one of the poems read as follows: "From our love, all that is left is a dried-up spring, yet all we had to do was push away the stone that was blocking it. I have as many memories of you as there are in a forest trees. You are my only love, so ring me please." It was revealed that he had gained entry to Harvey Nichols by sneaking through a back door, despite having been told to stay away. He had also taken cocaine. When it emerged that Pesci had been arrested and bailed, domestic violence campaigners wanted answers as to why this was allowed to happen. The head of the charity refuge said, "Before women get the protection they need and deserve." Few weeks later, Claire's funeral was held in Tunbridge Wells, with hundreds turning out to pay their respects and remember her. An inquest into Claire's death was held. The Westminster coroner, Dr. Paul Knapman, said that after hearing about the alleged errors by police, courts, and prosecutors, he would consider widening the inquest. The inquest heard that a risk assessment had not been done by the officers who had first interviewed Claire, and that she had not been told that he had been charged and remanded in custody. It was also revealed that a form had not been filled out which helps police establish a level of threat that someone might pose, but it was also discussed that even if the form had been filled out, as Michael Pesh had no previous convictions, he likely still would have been determined to be low risk. In 2007, the coroner ruled that the murder of Claire Bernal could not have been reasonably foreseen, but he did criticize the police for wasting time with filling out forms to provide a scapegoat. Klezma the Tricia was determined her daughter's death was not going to be in vain, and she channeled her efforts into changing the law and making stalking a criminal offense in itself. She worked with other families who had also been affected by stalking, teaming up with Carol Farrakay and Stella Moore. Carol's daughter had been stabbed to death after being stalked, and Stella's daughter had been shot also after being stalked. The 3 supported a pioneering new project, the first of its kind in Europe, called the Family Justice Center. All domestic violence or stalking victims who use the service are immediately classed as high risk before a fuller assessment can be made. The Family Justice Center works with various agencies and charities, including police and investigators, to help put victims in touch with the right people, to ensure that they have the correct support. Tricia, Stella, and Carol were also there in January of 2008 when the Family Justice Center was visited by the Home Affairs Select Committee. Together, they also helped set up protection against stalking, which amongst the many aspects of its work runs a helpline to support people impacted by stalking. Tricia said, unless you have a two-pronged approach, it won't work. They go into prison, and when they come out, it is likely they will either pursue the victim or move on to another. Simply locking them up is not going to work. It wouldn't have worked for my daughter's killer. Finally, their hard work paid off, and in 2012, new legislation was passed that made stalking a criminal offense. In 2021, Tricia was awarded an MBE for her campaigning work, and she remains an incredible victims advocate. Tricia said, Claire Bernal was a young woman cut down in the prime of her life. The impact of her death has been momentous and has led to much-needed changes in the law. It is through this tireless victims advocacy that Claire's memory will continue to live on. The caller is 19-year-old Noma Alaves Perez. Her 5-year-old daughter Dulce has vanished from a park. As police quickly descended on the scene, it would set in motion an investigation into one of the most baffling missing child cases. Dulce Maria Alaves had been born in April 2014. Her mother Noma was very young when she was born, just 14 years old, so Dulce would be looked after by Noma's mother Norma, who would eventually become Dulce's legal guardian. She was part of a close family, but her father Edgar Perez would later be deported to Mexico in 2018. Her mother said Dulce had a spunky but sweet personality, always giving hugs and kisses. She was a loving child who adored the Disney film Frozen and pretending to be a princess. Noma would go on to have another child, a little boy called Manny. Then in 2019, she was pregnant with her third. On September 16, 2019, Noma was waiting at her mother's house as her daughter and younger sister would get off the school bus at the same time. Dulce had only just started kindergarten and was settling into a new routine. When they got off the bus, Noma, Dulce, Noma's 3-year-old son Manny, and her younger sister decided to go to Bridgerton City Park. Before getting there, at around 4 p.m., they stopped in a gas station to get some ice cream. CCTV showed the family in the store. Dulce was seen wearing white trousers with butterflies and flowers on them, white sandals, and a yellow shirt with a koala on it. They then drove 5 minutes to Bridgerton City Park. After pulling into a parking space beside the basketball courts, Dulce and Manny got out and ran over towards the playground to go on the swings, roughly 30 yards away. Noma, who was 5 months pregnant, would normally take the family dog too and go to the playground with her children, but on this occasion she did not. She stayed in the car with her younger sister who was doing her homework, scratched a lottery ticket. Although they could see the park, the swings were obscured by a hill. The facts as to exactly what happened next is unclear, as it was reported that at around 4:20 p.m. Manny ran back to the car without his sister. But Noma would later say he had not ran back to the car. She said they could no longer see Manny or Dulce from the vehicle. So she and her younger sister got out of the car and went to go and look. She said they had found Manny crying with his ice cream on the floor. She asked him where his sister was, and he pointed to the buildings by the park. Initially believing she was playing hide and seek, Noma went looking, but there was no sign of her daughter. Before calling 911, Noma called her brother who lived close by and asked him to come out with the dog to see if they could find her. But there was still no sign of Dulce. She asked the children on the basketball courts if they had seen her, and she said that one of them had told her they had seen Dulce running towards the buildings and an African-American man walking near the buildings at that time. This differed from what another girl at the basketball courts had said. She said she had seen what appeared to be a red van and a Hispanic man nearby. Noma said that she had seen 2 children in the park, alongside the children who were playing basketball. I saw 2 kids the same age as my daughter and son coming out. They were holding hands, but I didn't see no grown-up with them. They just went around the park, and then I saw the girls at the basketball court, and that's it. She then called the police. Within minutes, the police had arrived on scene. Dog handlers were also there to assist in the search with bloodhounds, and they scoured through the park and wooded areas, hoping that maybe the little girl had just wandered off or become lost. The task in front of them was huge. Bridgerton City Park sits on roughly 1,000 acres of land in Cumberland County and was just behind Bridgerton High School. In the time frame of Dulce's disappearance, Bridgerton Police Chief Michael Gamery Sr. said that around 400 vehicles had been close to or around the park during that time. There were no CCTV cameras in the playground, but the police chief said other videos had confirmed she was in the park, as it had been around 45 minutes from her going missing to the police being called. He said the scope of the investigation had widened. The FBI Child Abduction Division were also brought on board to assist local law enforcement in the investigation. The community response was huge. Volunteers from the local community used their knowledge of the area to assist in the search for the missing child. The park had not been immediately closed off, and the locals soon descended to try and help. If she had been abducted, and the abductor had walked to the playground to get her, there was a possibility of footprints being left. But when people began arriving at the park to look for her, any potential footprints have been compromised or destroyed, as would any potential tire tracks. The following day, September 17th, the police described a van they were looking for, a red vehicle with sliding doors and tinted windows. The description of the van had come from a child, meaning there was a potential for the description to not be accurate. It had now been roughly 28 hours since Dulce had last been seen, and at 10 p.m. that night, an Amber Alert was issued. An Amber Alert is issued when a child is suspected to have been abducted. It circulates a name and description of the child in question, and any details about the potential abductor. Former FBI Special Agent J.J. Claver said it would have been better to have the Amber Alert go out within hours of Dulce going missing, and not the following day, as the park was popular with people and was a place where people would go jogging and work out. The FBI believed that her abductor was likely familiar with the area and knew it well enough to avoid being seen. FBI Special Agent Daniel Garabint said, "The person that did this likely lived in Bridgerton, being familiar with Bridgerton or had a reason to be where they were in that park." He added, "But we believe there are witnesses out there who saw the abductor, who saw the vehicle in the area of the park, and either haven't come forward because they're afraid to come forward, or haven't come forward because they don't realize how important the information is that they have." One problem faced by detectives straight away was the amount of rumors circulating on social media. Various online groups were started to circulate news and information about her case. People would join searches and go live on Facebook to bring awareness to the search efforts. On September 18th, a vigil was held, as the community came together to try and help. Within the first few days of the search, dive teams were deployed to search the various bodies of water around the area. The search was expanded on land and from the air to try and generate any new leads. Bloodhounds were being used to try and find any scent of her. They were able to pick something up for roughly an hour before they lost the scent. Dulce's 3-year-old brother Manny, who had most likely witnessed whatever had happened, did not speak very much. The FBI had taken him back there in an attempt to find out exactly what it was he had seen. But this went nowhere. Police said again that Dulce's family were being very cooperative with the investigation efforts and her grandmother was out putting flyers up. More than 300 officers were drafted in for the search and sex offenders in the area were also tracked down to account for their whereabouts too. More than 500 vehicles had been checked and more than 200 locations had also been searched. Rumors began to circulate that Dulce's mother had been arrested. This was false, and at a press conference the police chief spoke about the need to stick to the facts. Those in the community were living in fear that this could happen again. One resident said, "Everybody is worried about their own family, it's pretty scary." And another said, "It's not the same aside from being here. We are with our kids, but at all times we are looking to make sure they don't get away from us, or looking to see if we see anything strange." It had now been a week, and police issued an appeal for anyone who was in the park that day and who may have taken photos or videos to come forward, as they may have inadvertently caught something of significance. A big problem being faced by the authorities was that some in the community feared if they came forward with information, it could affect their immigration status. On Tuesday, September 24th, the police announced that, via telephone, they had successfully made contact with Dulce's father who lived in Mexico, hoping to see if he could shed any light on why his daughter would be abducted. 2 weeks after her disappearance, Dulce's mother gave a press conference. The subject of what her son Manny had seen when Dulce went missing also came up. Noma was also asked about the rumors that had been circulating regarding the circumstances of her daughter's disappearance and how the finger had been pointed at her. Some people still continued to not buy what Noma was saying, but she hit back at these claims. "That really affected me. When I saw all the comments saying I sold her, I killed her, that I know where she is, that really affected me. I've seen a lot of cases where mothers do that to their kids, but I love my daughter a lot and she knows that. Some questioned her apparently calm demeanor, but Noma explained that she did not cry in front of people, not even her parents. Noma's phone was also taken away several times by the authorities so that they could check through it for any relevant information. By early October, the reward for information was standing at $40,000. Noma and her mother gave an interview to NJ.com when Ema said that the police had told her they weren't going to give up on her daughter's case. She also spoke about the impact that this had had on her son Manny, saying that he had changed since his sister had gone missing. She said he had become more aggressive with other children and stopped listening, adding that he wasn't like that before. She and her mother said they wanted people to continue to look for Dulce, with Norma even speaking about hiring a private detective, but they were unable to due to the money it would cost. Norma also said she wanted other states to join in the search for Dulce, but didn't know how to go about getting them involved. Noma explained that she was trying her best to be strong for her children. Authorities had appeared to rule out the involvement of Dulce's father Edgar, saying that the FBI had spoken to him. On October 15th, a police sketch was issued of someone they wanted to talk to. He was described and drawn as follows: a slender male, possibly Hispanic, standing at between 5 feet 6 inches and 5 feet 8 inches, roughly 30 to 35 years old, with acne on his face. He was seen wearing a black shirt, orange sneakers, red trousers, and a baseball cap. Police Chief Gamari said that some people who bore a resemblance to the sketch had been brought in and questioned, but were subsequently released. The public were asked to be aware of any people who maybe had failed to turn up for work in the days surrounding her going missing, or anybody who had changed their vehicle or appearance since then. Cumberland County Prosecutor Jennifer Webb McCrae urged people to be aware of any sudden children in families, saying, "If you know a family that didn't have a child, pops up with a child that's in the 5-6 years old range and that seems suspicious to you, then I'd ask you to contact our FBI or our tip line or Bridgerton Police and get us that information." The response from across the country had been huge. Police Chief Gamari said, "The country is on alert. I can't even tell you that there's a state we haven't received a tip from." The case would reach an even larger audience when it was featured on the TV show Dr. Phil in December 2019. When Dr. Phil interviewed Noma, he asked her if she thought Dulce may have known whoever had taken her, but she said she was unsure. He continued to press her on who might be responsible. She then mentioned an old friend who had confronted her several times prior to her daughter going missing. She said, "Last time he saw me and my daughter together, and he just waved at me and said hi, and he asked me if that was my daughter, and I said yes." She said that he had tried to date her several times, but she had rejected his advances. Noma would also tell Action News that the person in question was one of the last people to see her daughter, but she added that she did not suspect he was involved. She said she was only answering Dr. Phil's questions, and that was why she had mentioned him. She also said during the interview that she had taken a polygraph after being asked to by the police, but they hadn't given her the results of the test. Although her demeanor on the show did strike many as very calm and maybe even a bit odd, Dr. Phil did note that her first language is Spanish, and when she made an appeal to her daughter in her native tongue, the emotion was much more apparent. She said in the interview that she felt like she had failed her daughter, and that if she was found, she would apologize to her. Jackie Rodriguez had been the spokesperson for the family, and although she no longer is, she appeared on the episode 2 and spoke about Noma. She said, "Oh, but I think she knows that the child is okay." She also said that she hadn't known Noma before Dulce had disappeared and that she had only seen her cry once. Dr. Phil said he would also be contributing to the reward, bringing the total to $75,000. Petitions to have cameras installed at the park had also garnered collectively nearly 2,000 signatures. In March 2020, COVID-19 put a halt on normal investigative practices. There were no more face-to-face briefings, courts were shut, and traveling out of state was significantly harder. Several psychics came forward, with one saying they had communicated with Dulce and that she was buried in a shallow grave near her school. Former FBI Special Agent J.J. Claver said that whilst he couldn't speak for the police department, the FBI would not place any credibility on information that had been provided to them by a psychic. Alongside the thousands of tips that had come in, 3 cryptic letters had been found in Ohio. One at a library, one at an ice cream shop, and one at a racetrack and casino. An index card had been sent to the racetrack and casino, and a letter had been mailed to the library. Police in Austintown had carried out searches, but these had turned up nothing. The handwriting appeared to have come from the same person. The letter sent to the library was 2 pages long and made reference to Dulce and her mother's appearance on Dr. Phil. However, the information in the letter could all have been found with a simple Google search. The letter had a Cleveland postmark, but it could have been sent from the Austintown area. The index card that was sent to the ice cream shop in Weatherfield Township, a few miles away from Austintown, was found in the mailbox of the shop. It was postmarked from February 21st. The index card sent to the racetrack and casino gave details that were specific to Austintown, which is close to the Pennsylvania border. It also did not have a postmark. Much of the writing was illegible, but according to a police report, part of it read, "Look for Dulce Alves, age 5, kidnapped from Bridgerton, New Jersey. Look website for story/photos. Dr. Phil, 76 truck stop. Dead End Street entrance Woods. Please look." The return address was illegible, but the zip code was traced to Mexico, but the police didn't know if this was really where it had come from. Investigators searched an area of roughly 40 acres near to the racecourse, with cadaver dogs and infrared technology, after the letter said she could be in that area, but nothing was found. It was announced that the letters were going to be sent to the police in New Jersey, that more investigations could be carried out to determine who had written them. Police Chief Gamari said, "We are investigating to see if we can determine what the source is, because if it doesn't come back as related, we want to know that." But he also emphasized that if these were part of a hoax, he wanted to see whoever had sent them prosecuted for distributing false information. The former family spokesperson Jackie Rodriguez said she had received a letter in March. It was random scribbles on bits of paper with words like 1776, campground, and Mexico on them. One thing immediately stood out. No address had been assigned to the envelope. It had been sent him. Gamari said he still believed the community was withholding information from investigators. "I can say that we still firmly believe that there are people in the public that have information that they are not sharing with us," he said. On the 1-year anniversary of Dulce's disappearance, Noma gave an interview about her daughter's case. She said, "And not leave her alone." Cumberland County Prosecutor Jennifer Webb McCrae said that with the absence of evidence suggesting that Dulce had died, they were going to hold onto the hope that she was still alive. It was around this time that local law enforcement reached out again to Dulce's father Edgar after a video was posted to YouTube on Dulce's birthday. 2 years after her disappearance, the community held a silent walk. It had now been 3 years since Dulce had disappeared. An age-progressed image of her by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was issued to the public. Her vigil had also been planned at the park she had vanished from. On what would have been her 8th birthday, people gathered to remember her. The search for Dulce Maria Alves continues. Detectives continue to carry out interviews and investigations in the United States and Mexico, and follow all lines of inquiry. The family home still contains her favorite toys and dresses as they wait for her to come home. Her backpack remains where she left it, untouched, with her school papers from her last day at kindergarten inside. Her mother said, "I have all of Dulce's dresses in safekeeping. We have not gotten rid of any of her clothes. We haven't given it away. Her dresses, her shoes, all of it. Her toys too. We don't let anyone touch her things. They're there for her." They also remain in the same home, hopeful that she will one day walk back through the door. In the United States, Bradenton is a Florida city situated south of Tampa. People spend hours browsing the galleries, studios, and shops in the Village of the Arts, which is well known for its vibrantly restored 1920s and 1930s cottages. The likelihood of someone becoming a victim of violent crime in Bradenton is 1 in 35. Since Bradenton's crime rate is higher than 81% of state cities in Florida, it is not regarded as one of the safest places to live in the country. That 20-year-old man named Guadalupe Vela used to reside in a sketchy area of Bradenton, Florida. Being a member of a street gang, he experienced rough days every other day. Guadalupe was having fun at a Santa Fe bar and grill in Bradenton on the evening of June 25, 2006. That evening, all he wanted to do was go out for drinks with his friends. However, he quickly got into a fight with a man from a rival gang and left the bar. Guadalupe went to a relative's home in the 100 block of 33rd Avenue East to cool off. He sighed with relief, thinking he was finally out of the mess, and spent some time at his relative's house. Guadalupe was about to believe he was safe when 2 gunshots were heard. Then there was an absolute silence. Guadalupe was discovered dead in his relative's backyard later that night. The detectives were notified of the tragic incident and responded quickly after receiving the call. They discovered that Guadalupe had been shot twice in the back as they examined his icy, lifeless body in detail. At the crime scene, the investigators also discovered a few 9mm bullet casings, which they gathered as additional evidence. They were informed that quite a few people had seen the shooting, but none of them would speak to the investigators when they tried to question them. The detectives had a hard time linking any suspect to the murder of Guadalupe because there was little evidence and no one willing to talk to them about it. The witnesses remained silent despite the investigators' repeated attempts to speak with them and get them to talk. The case investigation continued for several days without producing any information that would have helped the detectives find Guadalupe's killer. Not much was happening, but the case was still open and detectives were actively searching for fresh leads. After several months, a significant event in October 2006 moved the Guadalupe murder investigation along. Pedro Garcia, a 24-year-old known member of the criminal street gang East Side Crip, was pulled over in the 1300 block of 9th Avenue West in Bradenton that same month for a traffic infraction. A 9mm gun was found in his car during a detective search, and he was taken into custody for illegal firearm possession. However, it was not until later that the gun was sent for ballistics testing by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and the results connected the weapon to the location where Guadalupe's body was discovered. Nevertheless, it was subsequently ascertained that the bullets that struck Guadalupe on the fatal night were probably fired from an alternative weapon. Several witnesses to Guadalupe's shooting came forward in the years that followed, informing detectives that Pedro had spoken with them about killing Guadalupe. With the witnesses now coming forward, the detectives thought they might be able to apprehend Guadalupe's killer. Although Pedro was now a suspect in Guadalupe's death, the investigators lacked the proof they needed to charge Garcia. For the time being, Pedro was free to walk the streets. Many years later, in 2022, Pedro was connected to a different Bradenton murder case from 2014, and the investigators issued an arrest warrant for him. Samuel Kahn, a 25-year-old man, was identified as the murder victim in 2014. On December 20, 2014, early in the morning, a group of people had gathered at a location on Bradenton's 9th Street East, close to 37th Avenue East. This location, which was fairly remote, was the preferred choice for gang members looking to buy alcohol illegally after the neighborhood bars closed for the evening. Samuel was among those drinking on that December night. After confirming that rival gang members had engaged in combat, the detectives were able to determine that Samuel had been shot and killed by an unknown individual. Authorities did receive some leads in the days following the horrifying event, but they were unable to solve the case. Again, the nature of the crime was the reason for this. Those who saw the shooting decided not to talk to the detectives at all because it was another gang rivalry shooting. The detectives were able to speak with the witnesses in 2012 and were able to solve the unsolved case. Pedro was still free on bond, despite the fact that he was now facing charges related to Samuel's death. Even though the detectives were positive that Pedro killed Guadalupe in 2006, they were unable to bring charges against him because the witnesses to the crime remained silent about the entire incident. But later in 2022, when the witnesses began to speak, the detectives in Guadalupe's case finally got lucky. They discovered that Pedro admitted to another prisoner that he killed Guadalupe in June 2006 while he was housed in the Manatee County Jail in 2015 on unrelated charges. When the detectives learned that Pedro had provided particulars about the evening and the crime scene, their curiosity grew even more. Pedro claims that on June 25, 2006, at the Santa Fe Bar and Grill in Bradenton, he and Guadalupe, an East Side Crips rival gang member, got into a fight. The altercation between the two men began inside the bar and persisted outside as well. After exchanging a few harsh words, they parted ways. Pedro later showed up at Guadalupe's relative's home in the 100 block of 33rd Avenue East. As their argument grew more heated, Pedro finally pulled out a gun and pointed it at Guadalupe. Pedro gave him 2 back shots as he attempted to flee. This and additional evidence were sufficient to result in an arrest at last. The 40-year-old Pedro is accused of Guadalupe Vila's second-degree murder by detectives from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office's Homicide Investigative Unit. Pedro, who was still free on bond in connection with the murder of Samuel, was apprehended after being discovered in Bradenton at the 800 block of 30th Avenue West. A 16-year-old unsolved case has now been resolved. Investigators think Pedro may have been involved in other violent crimes from the early to mid-2000s that remain unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.